Today I'm going to show you how to reseal a leaking power steering pump on 94 to 97 Accords. If your pump is leaking fluid but it's operating normally otherwise, you can repair it for less than the cost of a replacement. If the pump has mechanical issues, it's not worth fixing, and it's more cost effective to purchase a remanufactured unit. Now this particular pump is leaking between the back half of the case and the pump body. The pump can also leak from the shaft seal, control valve cover, high pressure line fitting, or low pressure line fitting. All of these O-rings and the shaft seal will be replaced in this video. First step is to remove the power steering pump belt. There are two fasteners holding the pump. One of them's right here. Just want to loosen it up. 12mm socket. Here's fastener number 2. Then just loosen the tensioner bolt right here, and you'll be able to remove the belt. Loosen it until the belt's loose enough that you could pull it off the pulley. You may have to push the pump downward to relieve the tension on the belt after loosening the bolt. Then just tuck the belt out of the way. Before we go any further, I want to loosen up the power steering pulley nut. The easiest method is to use an impact, but since most people don't have one, I'll cover a few methods to remove it with hand tools. First method is with a strap wrench. Wrap it around the pulley. And that'll hold it. I wouldn't recommend using a chain type strap wrench because it can damage the pulley ribs. You can also insert a large screwdriver through a pulley hole to hold it, but you have to be careful not to damage the aluminum pump body. Or you could use this special tool that I use. It's adjustable. Just put it into the holes of the pulley. Then you could put your ratchet and socket on there. I'm going to pull out the reservoir out of its bracket. Just move it slightly upward. Give me some clearance. The pulley nut is 19mm. It's left-hand thread, so turn it clockwise to loosen it. Put on the holding tool. I have a 19mm deep well socket on a breaker bar. There it is. Now we're going to remove the pump. First step, remove the inlet hose. Drape a shop rag over the alternator belt to catch any fluid that may spill out. Remove the high pressure line on top of the pump, two 10mm bolts. Grab the line, pull it straight off the pump. Now I like to tie the hose up so it doesn't leak any fluid. Just going to wrap it with a bungee cord. Just hook it to this hole in the hood. Now we can remove the pump. Remove this fastener you loosened before. Remove this 10mm fastener. Then fully remove this 12mm fastener. Then to remove the pump, pull it towards the driver's side. Removing the pump, cover the intake port with your hand to prevent any fluid from dripping onto the body. Now I'm just going to remove this adjusting bolt. Now I'm going to proceed to clean the exterior of the pump. One thing to be aware of, don't get anything in the outlet port or the inlet port while cleaning. Remove the pulley. You want to clean the outside of the pump as thoroughly as possible before opening it to prevent contaminants from getting inside. There's a fair amount of crud on this. Get some brake clean and a clean shop rag. And get this all cleaned up. With a little bit of brake clean and some wiping, this is what you're left with. I also cleaned the groove on the inside of the bearing here. There's a snap ring that we have to access, and it was all filled with crud. Got a little brake clean, sprayed it in there, put my finger on the other end of a shop rag and just cleaned out that groove. Another tip when you're cleaning, when you're wiping the top side of the pump, be sure to wipe away from the outlet and not towards it. You don't want any of that getting inside. First thing we're going to do is remove the back end of the pump. 4 12mm bolts. When you remove the final bolt, this is spring loaded, so it will pop out. So have your hand on it. Lay the pump on its back. Wiggle and lift. We're going to set this aside. Now I'm going to get some clean rags. Since the pump is open, I don't want anything in here. I'm going to place the pump down, the shaft facing up, and we're going to remove this snap ring in here. That's what's retaining the shaft into the housing. This is an internal snap ring, so I'm going to set my pliers to internal. Put your hand there so the ring doesn't snap out, disappear. Now that the snap ring's out, you have to press the shaft out, and the bearing will come out of this bore here.
Honda recommends putting the pump in a vise with the jaws open. This is how I sat it on the vise. Again, I'm not letting the outer ridge rest on the vise because that could prevent the bearing from coming out. I'm letting it sit on this flat portion here and this flat portion here. Then tap the shaft out with a plastic hammer. That method works just fine, but I have a shop press, so I'm going to be using that.
Occasionally, the shaft may decide to be stubborn and won't come out using a plastic hammer. In that case, place a block of wood on the shaft to protect it and use a large ball peen hammer to drive it out.
I'm inserting the pump in between these two notches in the press plates so that this portion is flush with the press plates. I'm not inserting it so that it's sitting on this narrow area here. I'm just going to center them so that the ram is pushing pretty much in the center. That snap you heard wasn't anything breaking, that was just the sound of the bearing finally moving. You can see it's flush with the outer surface here. I'm just going to drive it out the rest of the way by hand. And there it is.
Now's a good time to check the bearing. Hold it by the outer race and spin the shaft. It should rotate smoothly without noise and stop rotating shortly after it's spun. If it continues to rotate, the grease is dried up and the bearing is bad.
Now what we've removed is the front bearing, and there's a spacer on there. You don't want to lose that. And what's back there is what we came in here to replace, and that's the shaft seal. Now as you can see, the bearing presses in front of this seal, so there needs to be a way for oil to get out if it's leaking, and that is through that hole right there. And this hole is normally at the bottom of the pump. So if you see oil leaking from there, that's because your shaft seal's leaking. Simple to remove. Just going to turn the pump over, get a flathead screwdriver, stick it in there at an angle to grab the lip of the seal, and I'm just going to tap it out with the palm of my hand. There it goes. While it's pretty clean in there, for the heck of it, I'm going to take a little brake clean and just spray it out. Now we can install the new seal. This is an OE Honda seal. Normally, I'd get some silicone paste and put it inside the seal before installing, but as you can see here, from Honda, it comes pre-lubricated from the factory with silicone, so I only have to do one more thing. I'm going to get a little bit of silicone spray and spray the outside edge of the seal. Just want a thin coat. That'll do just fine. Just a slight sheen. Drop the seal in. I'm just going to press it in with my thumbs. Get it started. Then we're going to drive it in the rest of the way with the socket.
You want to drive it in until it's flush with the bore.
To drive it in the rest of the way, I'm going to take a 20mm socket and a plastic hammer and drive it in until it's flush. That's flush. Now we can reinstall the shaft, drop the spacer back in there, then insert the shaft straight as possible. You don't want to damage the new shaft seal. Now we're going to drive it in the rest of the way by hand. Place the pump between the vice jaws so when the shaft comes out, it comes out between the jaws. I have an 1/1/16 socket. I'm placing it over the outer race of the bearing. You want it over the outer race. Place it over the inner race, you could damage the bearing. Then just tap it in with a plastic hammer until it bottoms out in the housing. And when you've driven it in far enough, you'll see the groove. It's all the way around. You'll notice there's a rounded side to the C-clip, and there's a flat side. I always place the flat side towards the bearing. I'm going to put the C-clip onto my snap ring pliers, squeeze it, then insert it into the bore. Get it down as far as I can. I don't have to get it exactly into the groove, because after I release it, I can then get a screwdriver and then press it in the rest of the way. Like that. Press it in over here, and that's fully seated. You can see the snap ring is now fully seated in the groove. Now we're going to work on the guts of the pump. You have a spring, the cam ring, which you'll remove by pulling it out off the pegs. The rotor, it has tiny vanes inside it. Make sure not to lose them. I'm just going to push them into the rotor. I remove it all at once. Oh, lost a few. Then we have the back cover. Now I'm going to take a pick tool, remove this rear O-ring. See, this isn't even an O-ring anymore. It's flattened out. This is the new O-ring. Just roll it onto the rear cover, like so. Now we're going to work on the cam ring. Flip it over. Now here's the cam ring. You'll see we have a large O-ring here, small O-ring here. Insert the pick tool under the O-ring. Then you could just use the tool to roll it off. Same with the O-ring on the nose here. Get the hook underneath and roll it off.
Be very careful that you don't nick the O-ring groove with the sharp tip of the pick tool. Then just roll on the new O-rings.
Now I'm going to take some Honda power steering fluid, put it on my finger, and coat the new O-rings with some fluid. This will help them seal better and they won't bind when we're sliding the components back in. Same thing on this back cover. Just lubricate that new O-ring. First thing we're going to do is drop the preload spring into the housing. Then we're going to take the longer pin from the rear cover. And insert it into the housing. Then we're going to take the side plate. You want the O-rings facing down. You'll see it has two holes in it, one that goes all the way through and one that doesn't. Line the hole that goes all the way through with the pin. Drop it in. Before we continue, we're going to remove the little pin here. Install that into the side plate. And here's the camera. You want to install it in the right direction. On one side, you'll see one dot. And on the other, you'll see two dots. You want the side with two dots facing up. As for which direction it goes, one pin is larger than the other, so it will only go in one direction. For example, if I try to install it in this direction, it won't go in because that pin's too large, so I'll rotate it. And it'll drop in that direction. Now we're going to reassemble the rotor. This is no big deal. Doesn't matter which vane goes where, but you must put them in the right direction. If you look at this vane, you'll see one side's rounded. The other side is flat. You want the flat side facing towards the rotor.
So you want the flat side pointing to the inside of the rotor and the rounded side on the outside of the rotor. Pat the rotor vanes flush.
Now it's time to install the rotor. It also has a right and a wrong direction. On one side you'll see no markings, but when you flip it over carefully so the vanes don't fall out, you'll see two dots here, two dots there. You want these two dots facing up. Carefully drop the rotor in so the vanes don't fall out. Rotate it to align with the splines on the shaft. Make sure none of the vanes are out of their grooves. They're all seated. The two dots on the rotor are facing the same direction as the two dots on the cam ring. That means they're both installed in the proper direction. Now we can reinstall the back cover. Not only are the holes offset so it can't be installed wrong, again, as I said before, the pins are different sizes. So if you try installing the cover wrong, not only will the bolts not line up, the pins won't fit into the holes. We're going to align the cover to the pins. Like so. And remember, there's that preload spring, so you're going to have to press the cover like that, hold it, and then install the bolts by hand, otherwise everything will pop back out. Just need to thread in two to prevent it from popping out, then you could let go and do the rest. Here we go.
Now I'm going to use a torque wrench to reinstall the fasteners. It's not a required tool, but it's a good idea, especially if you're new to auto repair and haven't developed a feel for tightening fasteners yet. I would normally reassemble the pump without one, but some people swear by them, even on non-critical fasteners like these, so I figured I'd show one in use.
Torque these bolts to 14 foot-pounds. They don't list a specific torque sequence, but when there isn't a sequence, I like to go in a crisscross pattern. Now the hardest part of the job is over. There are 3 more O-rings to replace, but they're easy to get to. 2 of them are located behind this plate here. This covers the control valve. Loosen these 3 10mm bolts. Spring loaded, so hold down on the plate with your thumb when you remove the last fastener. Here you have a spring. Inside there is the control valve. There's no need to remove it. Just take the spring out, and you'll see 2 O-rings, one here and one here. Get your pick tool and remove them. You can get at the second O-ring from the inside. Just be careful not to drop it into the hole where the control valve is. Drop the new O-rings into their grooves. Gonna take some power steering fluid again. Apply it to the O-rings. Gonna clean the other side of the plate off. Then drop the spring with the control valve back in. Then compress the plate and install the bolts.
You could easily get by with a 1/4-inch drive ratchet. A torque wrench isn't required.
You want to torque these bolts to 8 foot-pounds. Now you have the final O-ring. That's on this inlet fitting here. 1 bolt, 10 millimeter. Pull the fitting off. Get your pick tool, grab it and pull it out. There's a ridge in there, so you just insert the new O-ring, push it down until it bottoms out against that ridge. Take some more power steering fluid, lube up that new O-ring.
You can also put the O-ring on the inlet fitting first, lube it with power steering fluid, and install it that way. Both methods will work.
Take a little bit more power steering fluid and apply it to the surface of the fitting. Take the fitting, make sure that the bolt hole lines up with the threaded hole, and press it down straight until it bottoms out against the pump housing. Reinstall the fastener. And also torque it to 8 foot-pounds. Now reinstall the pulley, rotate it until the splines line up. Install the nut. Remember, rotate it counterclockwise. These are left-hand threads. Just hand tight for now. We'll torque it to spec after the pump's back on the vehicle. I'm going to reinstall the adjusting bolt back into the pump. Now you want to get this bolt lined up with this slot here, and the hole at the bottom of the pump lined up with this bolt over here. Install this fastener first. Install the nut with the large flange over here. And install the remaining nut over here.
You want to leave both mounting nuts slightly loose so you can tension the belt.
Now we're going to hook up the inlet hose. Now we're going to reattach the pressure hose. But before we do, I'm going to replace the O-ring on this fitting. You can see the O-ring right here. Get your pick tool, get underneath it, just like before. Get it out of there. Roll the new one on. Get a little power steering fluid again. Lubricate it. Now just push it straight onto the top of the pump. And reinstall the fasteners. Just snug them up, you don't need to over tighten them.
I'd recommend using a 1/4-inch drive ratchet to tighten these bolts because it will limit the torque and reduce the risk of possibly stripping or snapping off the fastener if you're not careful.
You want to torque the pulley bolt to 47 foot-pounds. Remember, you're tightening it in a counterclockwise direction. These are left-handed threads. Install my pulley holder. 19mm socket. Now we can reinstall the belt and tension it. Now I can pull the belt back up.
Make sure the belt is seated properly on both the power steering pulley and the crank pulley below before tensioning it. Running the belt even one pulley rib off can permanently damage it.
Now I'm going to snug up this bracket bolt. Now I'm going to start turning this tension bolt clockwise until the belt achieves the proper tension. Now you could check this with a belt tension gauge, but how I check it is, just take my finger, apply about, I don't know, 20 pounds worth of force, and if the belt deflects no more than 1/2 inch, it's tight enough. That's good.
Tighten up the power steering pump mounting nuts.
Again, no need to over tighten these, just snug them up. Here's your other 12mm nut. Pump the power steering reservoir back into its bracket. Just lift it up, align it, push it down. Now we're going to bleed the air out of the system. Start the vehicle up and turn the steering wheel from lock to lock about 6 times. Now you'll find bubbles in the power steering fluid reservoir. That's normal. That's the air being bled out.
That completes the bleeding process. Now check for leaks at the pump and top off the reservoir. You want to check for leaks at the rear pump cover, control valve cover, shaft seal, high pressure line, and inlet line.
Use only genuine Honda power steering fluid on these vehicles, or at the very least, power steering fluid manufactured specifically for Honda power steering systems. Just going to fill it up to the upper level line right here. That's all it took. And we're done.